Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm your host, Shana James, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about something that to me is profound. It's very concrete in how we apply this in our lives, and it's also been a part of my spiritual practice for a long time. And so what we're going to talk about is stories, how we conceive of who we are and what we do and what happens for us. And when you really look at it, you'll see that how we relate to life often happens through the stories we tell ourselves, right? We could tell ourselves a story of things are going really well today. We can tell ourselves a story of things are not going well today. And neither one of those is actually the primary experience, but it shapes then how we view the rest of our day, for example. So we're going to dive deep into this topic with Dr. Mark Pirtle. Mark, thank you so much for being here and welcome to Man Alive.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Shana.
Yeah. And Mark produced a film called Are Your Stories Making You Sick? And I watched it, and it's a beautiful illustration. I mean, you do beautiful work with these people, and I know you bring in other practitioners to go deep and go into shadow work and really understand the story of people's lives, like, right? Because there are these different layers of stories, what we tell ourselves day to day, what we tell ourselves about how our whole life has gone. So why don't you give us a little intro to how did you get into this concept of stories and what we tell ourselves and how we relate to ourselves?
Okay. All right. It's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it as brief as possible.
Let's do the short version.
Yeah, exactly. So professionally, I'm a doctor of physical therapy, and my focus was chronic pain.
Mm-hmm.
And chronic pain is an amplified signal, and that's really easy for people to understand. It's a signal that the body is making and you're perceiving, and it's outlived its usefulness. And
that signal, right? It keeps pinging, but it's not necessarily necessary.
It doesn't necessarily reflect actual tissue damage.
Got
it. Like if you hit yourself in the thumb with a hammer, tissue damage and pain, and that's an accurate reflection of actually what's going on.
Yeah.
Chronic pain is not like that.
Yeah.
Chronic pain is much more like depression, because to the brain, pain is pain, and roughly the same circuitry is involved in physical or psychological pain. It's something that's discomforting. And in both cases, you're in relationship to that pain. If you're the one with the physical back pain, there's a story that you have about what you've lost in terms of your functionality and who you think you are and a fear of the future. And if this gets worse, like all of that spooling happens, which causes your nervous system to get nervous about the pain. And your nervous system is going to watch it more.
Right.
And the watching it more is what makes it bigger.
Right. And I would imagine creates a kind of tension and
Well, it's
holding.
yes, of course, all that, but that's subtle compared to, activating the brain circuitry
Oh,
that then uh, becomes, more neurons are created, more complex networks, and the habit of your attention
ah,
is drawn towards this signal.
got it.
Okay, well, with depression, it's very exactly the same way, and so that's a feedback loop,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy to imagine if you're depressed, that's depressing,
Yes.
and so it's an amplifying feedback loop, and so I started a pain program at a place called Sierra Tucson, which is an inpatient rehab center like Hazelden or Betty Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes sense for a physical therapist. But my patients, they had tremendous pain. They've tried everything else. They had mood disorders. They were addicted, and so it was a whole mind body mess.
Okay.
And every single one of them had a story entrenched about who they were, what they could do, what was possible, what was not possible. I
Yep.
can't walk more than X because something will happen, right?
Yep.
And so
Yep.
like all of that. And so I'm a meditator. I spent months abroad in a monastery. I have some of the best teachers, and so I understand not only the book side of this amplification process, but watching myself
Yeah.
on the inside. And everybody's basically the same cause and effect on the outside and the same cause and effect on the inside. And so I just created a program where I could teach people how to understand how they were amplifying
Their
uh,
own pain.
their own pain. Of course,
Mhm.
inadvertently,
Yep.
nobody's to blame,
Nope.
right? But if you're not trained to watch the subtle dynamic, and it's very subtle,
Yes.
it's going to catch you. It's going to feel ultimately real, that like that's going to be your story.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's going to produce the effect. And the effect is an amplification.
Yeah.
And so I'm a systems theorist as well. I understand living systems theory, and systems are things that are alive that made of a bunch of parts that create patterns. And
Yes.
so chronic pain's a pattern, depression's a pattern, anxiety's a pattern, right? The way I finish my sentences is a pattern. Like how we're doing this right now are two patterned individuals. Like you can't think like me and I can't think like you,
Mm-hmm.
and these patterns are coming forth from us, and nobody knows what's going to, and I don't even know how I finish the sentence, right? But it finishes itself based on all the past programming.
Right.
And so we carry all this past programming forward, and until you understand, oh, this is my system making this perspective, then you're never going to get a perspective on it.
Yes.
You have
Okay.
to get a perspective on your perspective. That's
Yes.
how you begin to change. And
Yes.
that's the mindfulness piece.
And that is the mindfulness piece, which
Yeah.
is so powerful. I mean, I want to hear at some point more about your time in meditation all around the world with your
Not
teachers.
all around the world, but I had teachers here in the U.S. and well known. One of them, John Yates, wrote classic called "The Mind Illuminated," and so I studied with him for a decade. And my first meditation teacher was Shinzen Young,
Mm,
and he works at the Consciousness Lab at the University of Arizona. So very highly skilled meditation teachers.
beautiful, beautiful. So, okay, for people who are listening to this and they're starting to understand, whoa, I didn't even think about this. I didn't even know that I had stories that I was telling myself. I didn't know that I was a bunch of pre-programmed patterns.
Mhm.
Um, and you mentioned something about the subtlety of it, right? How it's happening on such subtle levels. Is there
Mhm.
anything that you can say to help illuminate that for people so that they can start to track more
Okay,
what's
yeah,
happening?
for sure. Okay, so it's pervasive and it's mundane, meaning it's
Yeah.
happening all the time, even when you don't even think there's a story or a pattern going on. Like I have a cup of coffee every morning, but
Yeah.
it's not like I consciously have to think of having a cup of coffee. I don't. My mind-body network is programmed. So when the sun comes up and these eyes open, this body walks over to the coffee machine. And so it's like it's as mundane as that.
Yeah.
It's it's everything. And
Yeah.
so if a person wants to really do the work, start doing the work, you have to be now awake. I don't
Yeah.
mean you got to be awake. Oh, here I go, walking over to the coffee machine. Okay.
Right.
So this is
And
what's
is
happening.
this is a um right, like starting to see I'm actually making choices even when I don't recognize that I'm making
Yeah,
choices.
but they're unconscious at that point.
Right.
Okay, and then you could go, "Oh, this is how I'm thinking about my ex. Oh, this is how I think about my ex. Okay, so is that true? Or
Right.
is that just my perspective? And can I hold a different perspective and a story that I make up about my ex that actually makes me feel better, maybe helps the relationship between myself and her and the kid,
Yeah.
right? Could I do that? I think so.
I love that. Can we go deeper into that one? Because that seems
Yeah.
very applicable, right? Or it's a powerful thing to realize. Okay, so there are relationships I have in my life, and a lot of Man Alive, we talk about relationships and
Mm-hmm.
relationship dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
So I have people in my life, whether they're exes or current partners or business partners or whatever. One of the things I found is depending on the story I have about someone, it actually impacts the way they respond to me. And one
Mm-hmm.
of my favorite learnings throughout my life is how to assume the best about someone and then get
Mm-hmm.
curious as opposed to assuming the worst.
Yeah.
And assuming the worst is often that kind of story that pigeonholes someone into this is their role, or this is how they've wronged me, or this is where they can't get it right. And then I start to relate to them in that way. So help us understand what you see about stories and relationships.
So stories are actually, these narratives are actually what connect us because there's an internal world inside both of us.
Yeah.
And we all know that emotions are contagious. And so if I have a story in me that is negatively biased,
Yeah.
it's going to affect how I show up, the emotional energy that arises when I'm in contact with this person or speaking with this, the word choices,
It's going to
the
have an impact. I
inflection,
love that
like,
you said emotion, like that we all know this, that emotions are contagious. I'm like, I don't know if everybody knows that.
yeah, well, I mean, we're co-responsible
Yeah.
for the version of the other person who
Yes.
shows up when they're with us.
Yeah.
I mean, in a very demonstrative way, if I walk up to somebody and punch them straight in the face, that's going to affect their relationship with me.
Yeah.
And so
And how they show up.
yeah, and how they show up. And so I'm co-responsible for how that relationship starts. And you don't have to hit somebody in the face, but you can hit them with a word.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, if they're not awake and aware, and let's say they didn't get prepared for the microaggression, and
Well, and it doesn't
they're
even
gonna,
have to be a word. It can be the story
yeah,
that you're holding in your head about them without even
yeah,
saying a word.
yeah, well, then they're gonna hit back, right? And
Right.
so that's how. But and so we're co-responsible. You know, I can show up and I can be unkind, and somebody can have a perspective on me and the situation, and they can feel into it and sense into it, and get above it, and not respond similarly, and that can change the dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And then that more skillful response might moderate how I show up in the next instance. And so we
Yes.
we are co-responsible for how each other show up. That's how relating works. And
Yeah.
so your question goes back to, how do these stories influence relating?
Yeah.
That's how, and so it's each of our responsibility to prime ourselves ahead of time, especially when you're going to be engaged with a person who you have a challenging relationship with,
Yeah.
you know, an ex-partner or a boss or whatever. I mean, you got to
The
prime ahead.
priming yourself, meaning like, okay, I gotta
You're driving over
watch
there.
myself.
I'm gonna get in my body. I'm gonna stay in my body.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna put a pebble in my shoe to remind me to stay in my body, because
Mm.
every time I get with this person, some reptilian trigger from my childhood gets triggered, and
And
I
then I
then I'm then
explode
I'm
or I
then I'm in my then I'm in my amygdala, and I'm not in my best self. And why can't I shift that? It's because things happen too fast. We're not in control. Our story is embedded in us. We have many versions of ourselves that live in here,
Yeah.
and each version is triggered by different contexts. And I mean, I've been doing this work for so long, and my ex can trigger me like that.
Right. No, I can still,
And
right. It's like
I
decades
can
and decades, and you can
I
still.
can practice like my hair's on fire,
Yeah.
and even put the pebble in my shoe, and say I'm not going to say this, I'm not, and then after the therapy session I'm like, what the heck? Why did you show up like that? It was
Mhm.
like, have some compassion.
Yes. Have some
It's
compassion. And
all
what would you say
doing
to
your
that? Like,
best.
why did you show up like that?
I'm not in control.
Mm.
The best I have is influence. The
The
best
best you have is influence,
I
because
can.
we're also co-responsible. So to say we're not in
Mhm.
control, it's a little paradoxical.
It's such a paradox because there is the part of you that could handle things skillfully, like
Yeah.
that part of you exists.
Yeah.
But there's a part of you that is regressed and wounded and uh, easily triggered, and
Yeah.
that part exists.
Well, and this is
And
where I think the witness and the meditation and the
mhm,
mindfulness comes in, because
mhm,
when I got divorced, I committed that I was, and I put this in my book recently, like I was not going to open my mouth until I could say something that would forward the relationship, or, be conscious. And
mhm,
for the most part, I'm not perfect, but for the
mhm,
most part, somehow that, the simplicity of just not opening my mouth
mhm,
has helped
mhm,
immensely. Right.
mhm,
And so, like, that shift of recognizing, okay, I might not be in control of what arises in me, but I
mhm.
can be in control of what escapes from my lips.
That's a great practice.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to take that to the next therapy session. I'm not, so thank you for teaching me that. I am not going to open my mouth
Yeah.
unless whatever comes
Unless
out
whatever comes out is actually
it
something
moves
to,
things in a better direction.
yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah,
So
thank you for that.
that, but now I'm like, okay, so as far as stories go,
Hmm.
well, I now have a story of myself that I'm capable of that.
Nice.
So that's a way that I can use a story for good.
Absolutely.
And
There's
like you were
always going
saying
to be a
before.
story. There's
Hmm.
always going to be a story. You know how Eckhart Tolle walks around and he talks about he just doesn't think. Well, if he's at the grocery store, he's like, eggs, yes or no? Do I have them? Like there's a conversation going on in
Yeah.
there, but he's not engaged in this story where you get
Constant.
fixated and that son of a gun cut me off in traffic. Like, no, that's not happening. He's
Yeah.
he's in the clear light, and it's quiet
Hmm.
when you're there.
Hmm.
But when you're relating to people or when you're trying to figure things out, like we have this part of our brain, it's in the left hemisphere where, you know, the vocal and linguistic part of our brain is active, and when that's active there's going to be story coming up.
Chatter. Well, and
Chatter.
I'm appreciating what you said before, which is, okay, you could tell yourself, I can't remember if this was before we started recording or after, but you can tell yourself a story that makes it worse,
Oh yeah.
or you can shift your story. And how do you, I think, we are loyal to our stories
Mm-hmm.
because they often connect us with people in our past, or our
Mm-hmm.
family, or a cultural group or something. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you help people shift those stories?
Okay, so that's a fantastic question. This gets into how stories can actually make you sick.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So stories have themes, right? And if we talk about the lousy things that happen to us, we can have losses, things can be threatening, we can feel inadequate, things can be unjust, right? And when any one of those things happens, let's say there's a loss,
Yeah,
um, a love relationship that you have, you lose. Well, you're going to get an emotion that goes with that, and
yeah.
and every time a person experiences a loss, they're going to feel sad.
Mm-hmm.
So sadness goes with loss.
Okay.
Okay. Every time, all the
Every
time.
time. Yeah.
If you're sad about anything, you're experiencing a loss right
Mm.
now. And
Interesting.
that's going to generate a story of loss. Okay. And if you stay stuck on that story of loss for too long,
Mm-hmm.
that's where depression arises.
Mm.
Because there's a brain involved. It's not just words. There's a brain that's recording everything that you're thinking and feeling. And each one of these emotions has a biochemical signature.
Okay.
And so the sadness is going to create chemistry in your brain, and certain brain circuits are going to activate.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you use them, the more uh, the larger and more complex they become, and
Yep.
more easily are they activated.
Yeah.
And that's why over time it's dangerous to have depression, because it can pass this, like, depression is not a disease until you cross this invisible line, and nobody knows when a person does that, but you cross this invisible line where you're really incapable. You are not in charge anymore. Like you don't have the strength of will and uh, cognitive capacity
Yeah.
to shift away from the negative story, the story of loss. And
Yeah.
that's when it's dangerous.
Well, and that, okay, so going
Well,
back to what you
that's sort of a
said,
disease process.
yeah, that the sadness is connected with loss. And then depending on what story you tell yourself about that loss, right? I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think as a meditator myself and as a someone who attempts to not bypass, but actually experience the pain or the sadness or the loss, but then notice, oh, right, what story am I creating around that? Or are you saying that depending on what story you're creating would send you down a road toward depression? Or I know some of that's just, biological and genetic as well.
Well, it's biological in the fact everything's biological.
Yeah.
You can't. There's this conversation we are having right now is
Is biological.
mediated by
Right.
by our biology.
Yeah.
So um, and stories are complicated. So let's say I have this loss, and this loss happened to me as a result of something that felt unfair.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mixed in that same story is a story of injustice. Well,
Yeah.
that's going to piss you off.
Yeah.
If anything happens that you don't think is fair or right, you know, you're going to be activated, and then your anger circuits are going to get come into play.
Yeah.
If you don't watch that and, you know, put some sort of governor, mindful governor on that mental spooling, you are
Mm.
going to rage at some point.
Okay.
All of
So how
these,
do you do that? How do you help people have a mental governor on that?
yeah, well, I through teaching, and helping people understand that this is the way the biology is going to go. I told you I was a
Uh-huh.
systems theorist.
Yep.
So a living system is making itself. Like right now, my fingernails are growing, but I'm not growing
Right.
fingernails,
So
right?
you help people understand like this is how the system is going to go. Here's where you could actually
Influence it
influence the system.
because you don't control it.
Okay.
You're not going to be able to control having the angry thought come up.
Yes.
You cannot. It's just like I tomorrow morning when I wake up, I mean, I could bet you $1 million I'm not going to think of a cup of coffee tomorrow morning. And guess who'd be $1 million richer?
Yeah.
You would
Me.
be, because I have no control over thinking of a cup of coffee. Zero. It's
Yeah.
going to arise.
Yeah.
And so if these circumstances, if the loss happens, if the injustice happens, you're going to have the narrative that comes
Yeah.
with it. And so what you have to watch out for, and what you have to be responsible for,
Yeah.
is whether or not you get fixated.
Okay.
And so fixation is, we don't have unlimited consciousness.
Yeah.
And our consciousness functions two ways. We can be aware, and awareness is global. Like right now, whoever's listening, keep your eyes on this podcast and listen to what we're saying, but be aware of the room in which you're sitting. Like all of a sudden, see everything.
Right.
And feel into your body and be aware of your mind, and just be aware of the whole space. That peripheral awareness, that's very right hemispheric,
Yeah.
and which is holistic, and it's mute.
Yeah.
And so you'll notice as soon as you open your awareness, things get quiet. Attention, on the other hand, is focused on the details. If you hold your
Mm-hmm.
attention on something, your left hemisphere is going to work out what this is. And that's where the narrative part of your brain is also.
Yeah.
And you can train through being fixated on a story of injustice or a story of loss to stay stuck on that habit of
Yeah.
thought. And that fixation is, all your awareness goes away when you're fixated,
Yes.
and you're just in a
Just
tight
in
tunnel
it.
vision, like when you're driving and you're not crashing. Everybody's done this.
Yeah.
You're going at the green, you're stopping at the red, and then you get all the way home and you're like, how in the world did
How
I?
did that even
You were in
happen?
your head
Yeah.
fixated.
So one of the stories that I've realized creates the most pain for me is that something shouldn't be happening as it is.
Yeah,
Like I shouldn't be getting divorced right now, or I
yeah,
shouldn't,
yeah,
be
yeah.
going through this, or right. Yeah. How do you work with that one?
Well, a big part of mindfulness and getting into the right hemisphere and breathing through. So don't bypass,
Mm-hmm.
talk to yourself. I'm feeling really hurt right now. And this sucks. This does not feel good. And I wish this hadn't happened.
Right. I wish it hadn't happened. It's not what I wanted to happen.
It's not what I wanted to happen. And yet, you know,
It is.
nobody's promising me anything. And so, okay, so
Right.
the spiritual challenge at times like this, and we've all experienced this. The spiritual challenge is accept what you have to accept,
Mm-hmm.
and then stay in the fight. Keep doing your best to create a better world for yourself and others. What can I learn? Oftentimes what I ask myself when something like that happens is, okay, so what can I learn from it?
Mm-hmm.
How did I contribute, possibly? How
Yeah.
can I be better? Because I can be responsible for that. I can't be responsible for how other people show up, but I can be
Right.
responsible
Yes.
for
That's a
myself.
lot of what I work with too.
And then, how do I keep from making this thing take me over?
Yes.
Because we
Love
all have a
that.
negative attentional bias, right?
Yep.
How can I keep the negativity? Because that's only going to kill me,
Right. I was just
right?
thinking too, it's like for me, those questions feel so important because, empowered questions like, okay, how did I contribute to this? Or
Mhm.
what actually happened here? And what do I want? How do I want to learn or grow from this? Right. Those are different questions than, why the fuck did this happen? Or what's
Yeah,
wrong with
yeah,
me? Or what's wrong with that other
yeah,
person?
yeah.
So there's almost like stories in the questions we ask ourselves
Mhm.
also.
Yeah, you're actually initiating a new perspective
Mm-hmm.
in all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Yeah.
and a story's going to come out of that too,
Yeah. Yeah.
but a more positive one. One where instead of threat and injustice and inadequacy and loss, there can be a sense of gift. Gosh, I'm glad this happened to me. I'm
Yeah.
grateful.
Gift or
Or
opportunity or
yeah,
Mhm.
opportunity. I get excited about the challenge. Or just even this is a challenge,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna, put on my big boy pants and I'm gonna handle it. And like
Yeah.
that's a story too.
Yeah.
And those positive appraisals cause different emotions as well. Challenge begets determination.
Right.
If you feel like something, like, I'm so glad this happened, ultimately you get through it and you're like, God, I'm glad that happened because of the person. That's where gratitude comes from,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
you know
Mm-hmm.
so it works on the positive and negative side too. There's stories everywhere.
Yeah.
We human beings are story
Story
machines.
makers, story
Yeah,
machines.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So powerful. All right. I want to ask you questions for days on end, but let's say if we were going to start winding down, what haven't we covered, at this level, the surface level that you want people to know
Yeah,
or to, then delve into more?
yeah. Just to be cognizant that if you're stuck cycling,
Mm-hmm.
um that and oftentimes when I work with clients, I really try to get them to understand things can get worse.
Yeah.
It's bad right now, but if you don't stop that fixation and spooling, it's nothing ever stays the same. And if
Yeah.
you keep doing this activity, this activity doesn't lead to a good place. That's the karma of it,
Yes.
right? And when we talk about karma, karma isn't what happens to you. Karma is what comes from you.
Mm.
Karma is this habit of doing whatever you're doing and then feeling whatever you're feeling.
Yeah.
And so that's your karma. And so if you're doing something right now inadvertently,
Mm.
that like spooling, staying stuck, not being aware that you're stuck on a story of injustice or loss or threat or inadequate, like if you're not aware of that, get aware and
Yeah.
then do something about it.
Yeah.
Okay? Because you have to be the one. We don't discover wisdom. We 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 earn it
Mm.
through a journey through the wilderness that nobody can
Uh,
spare you, that nobody can take for you. You have to do it yourself.
yeah. Yeah. Right. It almost, like you said before, I can't remember exactly how you said it, but nobody owes you a life of, joy and ease. But sometimes it seems that way, that should be what's happening. And so then if that's not happening, like that's one of those places where I'm like, oh, yeah, I didn't want it to happen this way, or this shouldn't be happening. But if I get stuck in that story,
Mm-hmm.
then it takes me down. Whereas if I look at, okay, this is happening. What is the opportunity here? How can I learn or grow? How can I serve someone else through this?
Yes,
Then,
that. How can I serve somebody else through this?
mhm,
That's the best question of all,
yeah,
because it's through service and you doing good for yourself and others. Goodness arises in relationship.
yeah,
Beauty arises inside the beholder.
mm,
Goodness is beauty that is shared.
I
And
love that.
and if you want to feel good, just start doing good for yourself. Start with yourself, but also, you know, be the one that shows up and is in their higher self and is
Yeah,
kind and errs on the side of being kind and compassionate. You be that person,
yeah,
and you're going to be the immediate beneficiary of that goodness.
I love that. Can you tell people how to find your film and a little bit about what they'll discover there?
Yeah, okay. So the film is playing on PBS, and there are loads of stations. So I don't know what the schedule is. All these independent stations are going
I
to play
found
it
it
whenever.
online though. I think I went to your website and I bought it
Okay, so yeah, you can do that. You
or
can
rented it.
yeah, you can go to wholehearted.com.
Mhm.
And so the film is called Is Your Story Making You Sick? And it's about 8 people who go on 4 retreats, and they have all kinds of stress related conditions, and uh, they work together and bond and heal
Yeah,
basically, and it
yeah, it's
shows it
beautiful.
shows shows the process. And so that's what's available for people if they do the work.
Yeah.
And so
I mean,
is your
they had
story making?
major breakthroughs. It was really powerful to see. And, I know you and I have been
But there's
involved.
yeah, but there's also a cautionary tale too.
Yeah.
So that I think that makes the film so interesting, because you get to see this contrast between how some people view their story and how
Yes.
another
And how
person views.
another person views his story. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. Yep.
So is your story making you sick? Wholehearted.com is where
Mhm.
you can rent that. I have a book on Amazon titled Is Your Story Making You Sick? Um, you can connect with me if you have a question. My email is mark@skillfullyaware.com.
Great.
Um, I have an online class that I teach uh, called Skillfully Aware. I'm changing it. I'm reworking those things. And then Shayna, we should tell them about
Yes, that
the
we are going to
retreat
be
that we're
working
doing.
together
Yeah,
in the
that's right.
spring. So if you're listening to this before, what is it, March or April? I think it's
It's
April
March.
of
Yeah,
March
March. Yeah,
of
March of
2023.
2023.
We're
Yeah,
coming together with another amazing colleague, Jed Diamond, to do a retreat for men who are starting over after a relationship ends, and really to create that kind of inspiring new story as
that's
opposed to
right.
be stuck in, oh, I'm going to create the same patterns, or this is just how relationships are. I should give up. This isn't going to work out for me. we're excited to bring men together to, open to this new story of possibility and love and passion and excitement and depth and connection and all the good things that can happen.
Yeah, I'm so excited to work with you personally. We haven't met each other face to face, but only through Zoom. So I'm excited for
Yeah,
that to happen.
me too. Me too. So if you're a man listening and you're interested in that and you're, whether you are at the tail end of a relationship and just starting over, or whether you've been single for a while and you're starting to think about dating, or whether you are dating, or whether you're in a new relationship and trying to figure out how to not recreate those patterns, all of those phases of relationship would be a,
And
a great way.
and if you're a woman who has a relationship with a man who's stuck in some way, you know,
Send them to us.
lovingly suggest maybe because retreats are something special.
Yeah, it's really
Retreats,
powerful.
so much happens in retreat.
Yeah.
You get
Yeah.
away and you can focus on yourself. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here and for
Thank you.
doing this deep, deep work in the world. And,
Thank you.
I respect you as an integral practitioner and someone who has studied with many teachers and humbled yourself and, allowed yourself to go through this process of unraveling consciousness and stories. And thank you for bringing that to so many people.
Thank you. You too. You too. I see all of the wisdom and the goodness in you, and I appreciate you sharing it with the world.
Thank you. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word alive, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.